Today, a political U-turn which has saved a piece of Hampshire from the house builders.
Also, how other areas are disappearing fast.
And the royal who says we must think green or pay the price. Hello, this is the last programme in the current series of Countryside Close. For 5 months now, we've been looking at the pressures on the countryside.
Today, we're revisiting some of the battlefiels where people have attempted to fight off those dreaded changes.
Changes. Turn and face the strain. Changes. Don't tell them to grow up out of it. Changes. Turn and face the strain. Changes. Where's the shame you've left us up to our necks in it?
But change is a theme that's run through all our programmes. At the start of the series, film producer and countryside campaigner David Putnam had this to say.
Society has to develop and change, and that means that some things have to be sacrificed. What is needed is for all of us to be fully aware of the costs and benefits of progress. What's the point of change if our daily lives become poorer as a result? It's my honest belief that a beautiful countryside adds significantly to the quality of our lives, and losing it diminishes all of us.
David Putnam's concerns are shared by the Duke of Edinburgh. He's president of the Worldwide Fund for Nature, chairman of Food and Farming Year, and is keenly aware of the problems. But it's the solutions that bother him.
I think it's important for people to appreciate what's happening, but that's quite a different thing to saying how one should tackle it. You know, it's rather like the Old Testament prophets. They told you that look out, woe, woe, and be careful and one thing and another, but they didn't actually tell you how to get out of the problem. And in the sense that it's easy enough to say, look out, we're heading for disaster, but it's not really quite so easy to say, where do we go from here, or how do we avoid the disaster?
Well, despite the concerns, the losses go on. Sites of special scientific interest are our most important wildlife habitats.
There are 5,000 in Britain, but a recent survey showed that during the last 4 years, 14% have been destroyed.
Val met up with Peter Rain of the Kent Trust for Nature Conservation and visited one site that's being obliterated.
This is Chilston Park, a rare wetland site in Kent, which is home to some unusual plants. Sadly, it's partly destroyed by the new M20 extension and further threatened by the high-speed rail link. So how much does one site really matter?
If most of Britain was still covered with semi-natural landscape, then I'd probably say, yes, OK, this pond doesn't matter very much, or the trees don't matter very much. But the fact of the matter is that certainly in Kent, maybe 7 or 8% of the land area of the county is really of considerable wildlife significance, and that's not very much left. And I think we've got to the state now where, particularly with wetland sites, ancient woodland sites, and unimproved meadowland, flower-rich meadows like we see pictures of in the 1930s, those have disappeared so fast over the last 40 or 50 years that we have to say is enough and fight every site. If the rate of destruction of sites continues as at the moment, then I think by the middle of the next century, the refuge areas are going to be too small for wildlife to be able to colonise out.
Is wildlife in crisis?
Certain species of wildlife in Britain are certainly in crisis, but I would argue that the overall balance is approaching that crisis point. When we get down to too few refuges, too few nature reserves, and too much destruction and damage outside the nature reserves, then it will be in crisis.
I mean, it really is terrible. We can't go on chomping through our wildlife at that rate, can we?
No, it's terrible. And Pete Rain's suggestion is to lobby your MP. That's what the system's there for.
He thinks that'll help, does he?
Well, the pen's supposed to be mightier than the sword, isn't it?
Hope so.
Other areas are under threat from mineral extraction. You may remember we looked at a couple of places earlier on. One was the Test Valley in Hampshire.
Despite its beauty, gravel extraction has been given the go-ahead and a conveyor is to be built across the valley. And there's another valley in Kent that's also under threat. Summer in the Dean Valley. This is one of the most highly protected pieces of countryside in Kent, a special place where rare plants flourish, where the North Downs Way threads across gentle slopes, and ancient woodlands look down on fields of barley. But soon all this is likely to change, because the valley is rich in other ways. 17 million tonnes of chalk will be taken from the Dean Valley over the next 20 years. It'll become a massive quarry. The Rugby Cement Company say it's vital if they're to keep their Rochester works open beyond 1994. Existing supplies are running out, and the jobs of 250 people are on the line. The storm over the decision to allow a quarry here has rumbled on for 2 years. The Department of the Environment refused to intervene, and it went through on the nod of the County Planning Committee. That angered local protesters, who pointed to a similar application to dig chalk from the valley several years ago. Then it was thrown out after a public inquiry. Now they accept that the battle for this beautiful bit of England is almost lost.
Christopher Patten is the only man who can save us now. We've got to pin our hopes on him. If he doesn't call the decision in and re-examine it, I don't think we can do anything. People in Cuxton are law-abiding people. They don't like the idea of a quarry, but they wouldn't break the law and lie down in front of bulldozers. Maybe I would, but most of them wouldn't, and I'm not going to do it on my own.
Is this the 11th hour, or are you past that stage even?
We're at 1 minute to midnight. 1 second to midnight, I think, not 1 minute.
Let's hope Chris Patten intervenes. It hasn't all been bad news, though. There are some successes for the campaigners. Hucking Church was due to be sold off due to poor attendance, but the parishioners have rallied and reversed the decision.
Unfortunately, it wasn't possible to safeguard all historic buildings from the developers, as Tom Baker found out.
You know how it is. House hunting on a hot afternoon. Fed up, you stop. One pot of tea follows another. And there you are, took short, as it were. Hello, Signor, si, there's one for sale over there. Off I rushed, clean forgetting to pay the bill. Lose for sale? How odd.
Watch where you go!
Some people never learn. Vacant possession. How very convenient. Now, who would make a public loo their home? I don't know that. It has its attractions. How much do you think this place would fetch then?
Well, more than a penny or two, I suspect.
Pretty penny?
Maybe £50,000.
50,000? But why?
Well, you know, it's got a number of alternative uses in the current use. It's got a planning consent for art studios. It could be used maybe for photographic studios, maybe design studios. Well, there are a number of period features here, in addition to the planning consents. There's the Royal Doulton China, Art Deco by design, and I suppose late Victorian, and of course we've even got the kitchen sink at the back.
You seem very well informed.
Well, my name's Carpenter, I'm the auctioneer. I won't shake hands.
I understand. Now, if 2 Luz-Lautrec could have bid for this, he might have become known as 3 Luz-Lautrec. Just a thought. Having relieved ourselves, there seemed just one other thing to do on such a hot afternoon. Top up. This is Tom Baker for Countryside Close at the Crown and Sceptre.
But there are signs that the policymakers are greening. Our award for the greenest county council goes to Hampshire. They've started a rural heritage scheme. It aims to protect precious sites of landscape by paying landowners to manage them sympathetically.
These areas are very few and far between, and this is one of the richest meadows of its type in the county.
If this had been lost, presumably then a lot of wildlife would have been lost as well.
Certainly, yes. The plants that you get here are only found on these unimproved sites like this, and the insects that go with them. We can hear a grasshopper clicking away in the background at the moment.
Everyone, it seems, is pleased to safeguard the wildlife in this corner of England.
I like all things old, you know, really, and I just like to think it was probably like that in the Middle Ages, you know. Nothing much has changed since.
Hants County Council are also preserving larger areas like Harewood Forest, where there are 2,000 acres of ancient oak coppice, and the notorious Foxley Wood is another site they believe's worth saving. At the council offices, they're developing plans for even more conservation work.
What we're embarking upon is ensuring that future generations have a countryside to enjoy, because at the moment it's under enormous threat, and if we don't register and understand what we've got at the moment, we could well lose it all in a few years.
At national level too, the government appears to be taking on a green tinge. David Haig's been keeping an eye on the latest developments.
That archenemy of the countryside, Nicholas Ridley, was given a roasting. The burnt effigy was a protest over plans for a new town here at Foxley Wood in Hampshire. Mr Ridley said he was minded to allow it. His successor as Environment Minister, Chris Patten, did a U-turn and said he's minded to dismiss it. At the Conservative Party conference last week, the new minister announced sweeping changes in government attitudes to the environment. And for those fighting development pressures in the southeast, there was particularly good news.
So long as I've got anything to do with it, our policies for preserving the green belt will be rigorously applied. But I want local communities, wherever possible, to take as many of the decisions about their character and their future as possible.
And the Conservatives have just published this book to back up their claim to be the true guardians of the environment.
Well, despite all the pressures, not everything in the countryside is under threat. There are also some positive things taking place, like the revival of traditional crafts. We reported on one Dorset blacksmith, Ian Ring, for whom business is booming.
A lot of people are moving in from the east, bringing the money with them. And people are restoring old houses, doing up old barns. And even new houses are today, with planning as it is designed to look old, so we tend to fit in with that. And a lot of the old crafts do as well.
What's the next step with the forge? Any ambitions now with it?
Well, after I made my first million, I'm not too sure. Yeah, I like it just to keep getting bigger and better. I'd like to have more staff. I'd like to train more people to do the job. And I'd like to become more purist, I think, and do more genuine old ironwork. It's not always possible.
That's going to be the best musical sequence of the series.
I know you like that one. I'm really surprised you managed to resist using the anvil chorus.
Is that a Verdi or a Rossini? Or a...
Yes, it is actually,
I
yes.
didn't realise you were an opera buff as well.
Just one of my many talents.
Well, all through this series we run a spot called Eyesores, which looked at some of the monstrosities and injustices of development in the countryside. So with positive things in mind today, we thought we'd pay tribute to the goodies. The Pells Marsh in East Sussex was recently tidied up.
It had been used as a dumping ground, and look what they dragged out.
Now it's been restored to its former glory. Isn't it nice?
Everywhere it seems there are people trying to blot out the blots. This lot are hard at work restoring this dew pond at Lullington Heath in East Sussex. Look at it now, a real little nature reserve.
Wildlife is being encouraged in some quite unlikely places nowadays.
How about this electricity substation at Broadoak in Kent? That too's been transformed into a nature reserve.
Even the pylons have been converted to bridges over the lakes.
People are also concerned about their local environment.
This bus stop at Linton in Kent has been specially shortened to blend in. Parish Councillor John Gillett says it was too big and out of place with the surrounding architecture.
But what can you do about offices like these? They're described as unsympathetic in a historic town by Canterbury planner John Chaters.
He thinks this sort is much more in keeping with the other buildings around.
Some people are even suggesting that we should build our houses underground to prevent them being eyesores. Architect Paul Sant says these are the ultimate environmentally friendly dwellings.
He's just designed a house he calls The Set. It's got all the mod cons, but once the lid goes on, you'll hardly know it was there.
But despite all these worthy works, the enemy's never far away.
Back at Pells Marsh, the fly tippers and rubbish dumpers are already moving in.
Of course, September 1989 marked an important anniversary for the countryside because 50 years ago, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain gave the Germans an ultimatum to pull out of Poland. But
I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
At that time, of course, we were a food importing nation, but as the U-boats started to sink shipping, starvation became a real prospect.
the farming industry was pushed into overdrive to produce more food. But with the men away in the army, who was left to man the tractors and the milking stools? Enter the Women's Land Army. They said it was men's work, but the Women's Land Army proved them wrong. There was no job too arduous for these girls, and while the men were out defending the nation, they were feeding it. One woman who opted for the Land Army was Mary Twyman. She was 19 when she was called up, and for the first time in nearly 50 years, visited her wartime farm near Dover.
Well, Mary's writing a book about the history of the Land Army, and since she was having some trouble contacting former Land Army girls, we helped her out with a plea for them to write to her. Val went back to see how the project was going.
I found Mary hard at work on her book. She's been sent over 60 accounts, both comic and tragic, of life in the Land Army. They're still coming in, and some have even enclosed rare books, photos and mementos of events in those war years.
One here signed by a signature of the Queen to thank, this is one of the girls who worked for 10 years on the land, serving from the 28th of March 1940 to the 30th of November 1950.
So they've entrusted you with some pretty precious material,
Yes, they
haven't
have, and especially this one, which is a photograph of the first land girl to wear one of the wedding dresses that was sent over by the women of America. When Mrs. Roosevelt came over, she brought these wedding dresses, and that's the picture to show Mrs. Audrey Maxwell on her wedding day in 1944. I spend most of my time answering letters and getting the photos taken off so I can send them back, because they're very precious mementos.
So this has become a full-time job for you now,
Yes, yes, it really has.
I think you must be becoming something of an expert on the Land Army.
Well, I'm learning all the time. I hear of different things that happened, and you know, it's very interesting indeed. I think it will cover almost everything about the Land Army, and it should make a superb record.
I'm sure you guaranteed to sell quite a number of copies, did you?
Well,
by the
they all
response?
say that without failure, however hard it was, they all enjoyed it, and they all want to see the book.
Oh, well, there have been quite a few nostalgic moments in the series. In fact, we've had a spot dedicated to them. Each week, Bob Farrer's brought in some of his collection of agricultural memorabilia to the studio to ask us what they're for. Here he is to tell us about the last one.
Now, Bob, I remember you said Alice, the swimming companion, would have been in double trouble.
Yeah.
Wasn't anything to do with off with their heads or anything, was it?
No, Alice got too big and cried, and then she shrank and she fell into her own tears and met a mouse swimming in the same pool. That was the mouse, her swimming companion. That's the double-barreled mousetrap.
Ah, how does it work, Bob?
Well, it's very ingenious, actually. When I get children at the museum, they love this, and if I have to tell people what my favourite item is, this obviously is one of them. Now, you see, you put a piece of apple.
Yes.
They might prefer apple to cheese, you know, underneath the paddle. Then when the mouse shoves its nose under the paddle to get at the apple, down
Very
it comes.
efficient. Now, we've got Stetson for the Roundup programme,
Yes,
so let's get a
last
winner.
round up.
The last winner of the
The
series
mystery object
is...
is a mousetrap, double. Mrs. N. Shearing from Fordingbridge in Hampshire. Absolutely right. Jolly good.
Congratulations,
Nice postcard
Mrs.
too.
Shearing, and thanks very much, Bob, for everything you've brought in through the series.
My pleasure. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Good.
And our thanks to everyone who's written into the What's It For slot. While we've been on the air, the country's been experiencing one of its hottest summers ever. And among the phenomena that came to light are these, the markings of Iron Age forts visible from the air because of the drought.
The heat has also been good news for the wine industry. You may remember that we travelled to Bordeaux with Peter Warden, an aspiring grower, to ask the French what they thought of his English vintage.
Well, the verdict was they liked his wine, but after the hot summer he looked set to produce something even better. David Haigh went back to see Peter at the start of his grape harvest.
This could be a vintage year for Peter Warden's 3-acre vineyard. The man whose wine passed the acid test at no less a place than Chateau Mouton Rothschild is now harvesting the fruits of a brilliant British summer. And although he won't know until it's in the bottle, he believes the sunshine of the past few months will help to create a wine of superb quality. The other factor that's causing all this optimism is a bit of fungus.
You probably notice we've got some bits of rot about the place. This is normal, but novel in my experience anyway, is that this year we have noble rot.
Although it has the name rot, noble rot, this is a good thing.
Oh, it's superb. It's, of course, what the French in Bordeaux in particular, in their famous white sauternes and things, depend on. Those things are described as botrytis wines. And in Germany, the Auslesers and beer and Auslesers are dependent on this form of rot. But it's extremely rare to get it to any significant extent in England.
So when are we likely to see this wine in the bottle?
Well, we'll have it in the bottles by the middle of next year. And because it's going to be very ripe and acidity is going to be very low, unusually for our wines, it's probably going to be drinkable by the autumn of next year, so possibly earlier.
So, 1990 is the year to look out for that English wine. From this unlikely-looking concoction will come something cool, clear and eminently drinkable.
Well, Peter, this is the sort of wine we took to Bordeaux, to Mouton Rothschild, made a big impression on them. Maybe this year's will make an even bigger impression.
Well, I'd like to try. There's the way the weather's been and the way the crop looks, there's every possibility that the quality this year will be superb.
Well, perhaps we could have a little toast, should we?
Yes, indeed.
English
Why
wine?
not? Countryside Close.
Countryside Close.
Cheers.
At least wine growers are optimistic about the future in the countryside. Everywhere else, though, it seems the pressures are growing. And according to the Duke of Edinburgh, it's up to all of us to try and redress the balance for our future.
It'll take a long time. And the race is to see how much permanent damage has been done by the time we start, or in a sense, the human community on the earth starts to, in a sense, withdraw a bit and let the planet recover. Because I don't see that, can you imagine at this rate of progress, is it really going to be possible for any life on Earth to, let's say, in 500 years' time? And yet 500 years, not very long ago.
Sounds serious, doesn't it? But that's about it. We hope you enjoyed the show. And if you want any details about items in the series, there's a compilation fact sheet. It also contains details of our conferences that start shortly. These are arranged by TVS in association with the Midland Bank, and the address for that comes up after the programme. Well, thanks for watching, and we're back in the spring. Until then, we'll say goodbye. Got the hat?
Yes, we've rounded him up, time to head out
Head him out and head for the corral, yes.
Oh, the sunset, I was thinking.
Oh, I see. Well, I hope it's not, sunset in oblivion. We're going to be back in April, aren't we?
Yeah, a few days in the country would go down well, I think.
See you then.